Can you just touch on, you already spoke about the 4 principles or the main principles of Swiss 8. Can you just go through the 8 principles for us, for the listeners?
Yeah, so the top 4, we call them the top 4, bottom 4. So the top 4 is fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, and sleep. And that we call those the top 4 because they are the holistic health lifestyle principles that we try and get people to start with first, build a routine around those 4 principles. And then once you're happy and you're comfortable, that has become habit and it is a routine. Then we've got minimalism, discipline, time management, and personal growth. And they are basically life hack kind of principles.
Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome to today's episode of the Live, Train, Perform podcast. I'm your host, Sean Kober. During this episode, we are rounding out the Swiss 8 mini-series. Swiss 8 is a proactive mental health program that allows people to schedule in and structure the important things in their lives, and that is delivered via an app straight to your phone. A lot of the content provided comes from veterans that have transitioned to the civilian community and started their own business, and one of my training programs is on the app, so you can find that at swiss8.org, which I'll have linked in the show notes. The final pillar of the Swiss 8 model is minimalism. What is minimalism? Minimalism is a style in which a small number of very simple things are used to create a particular effect, and that comes from the Collins Dictionary. Now, for me, that doesn't really weigh up minimalism for how I can apply that to my life. For me, what is minimalism? Minimalism is simply living within your means. Simply put, minimalism is the intentional promotion of the things that we most value and the removal of anything that distracts us from it. It's about having a clear understanding of what you value most in your life, and this can mean things that take up your space and time, and then intentionally removing anything in your life that gets in the way of what you value the most. So at its core, minimalism is simply being intentional with the way that you live your life, and only allowing what aligns with your most important values to take up your space and your time. That, to me, is minimalism. Before I continue on with the episode, I just want to tell a fable that I heard. I don't even remember where I heard it. I don't recall where I got it from, but it's always stuck with me. And that is the story of the businessman and the fisherman. So the businessman's on holidays in the Pacific Islands, and he's walking along the beach, and he spots a fisherman who's kicking back on the beach in the shade of his boat. And he asks him how the day's fishing was going, etc., how long he fishes for. And the fisherman's like, I fish for a couple of hours every day, and I get enough to feed my family, etc. And the businessman goes, well, why don't you spend more time out there fishing so that you can catch more fish, you can sell more fish, you can buy another boat, you can employ more people, you can bring in more money, you can build your own factory to start distributing, blah, 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 blah. And the fisherman goes, what would I do then? And the businessman says, then you can sit back and enjoy your life. And the fisherman replies, what do you think I'm doing now? The first time I heard that, I thought that was extremely powerful, because we live in this capitalist society where growth is always the goal. For the most part, people listening to this podcast live in a capitalist society, and this capitalist society is consumer driven. It is all about spend more, do more, own more, be more, and this is not inherently a problem, but when we're focusing on growth in the wrong areas, then it can become a problem. Now, something that intrigues me is the success of most countries is determined by and measured by GDP, which is the gross domestic product. And this is the combined market value of all finished goods and services within a country in a year. Now, this doesn't tell the whole story. All this tells us is that this country is making this much money. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, because when these capitalist societies are making more money, then the government can spend more on roads, infrastructure, education, healthcare systems, etc., etc. But the issue for me is that GDP only measures the economy. It does not measure the happiness of the people in these countries, and it does not measure the health of the people in these countries, and it doesn't measure the distribution of wealth in these countries either. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by distribution of wealth. So in 2013, China's GDP was $9.2 trillion and Luxembourg's GDP was $60 billion. Now, that doesn't account for how many people are in the country and how that wealth is distributed. So in China, $9.2 trillion is distributed amongst the people, which is GDP per capita, and each person roughly equates to $6,800, whereas Luxembourg has a much smaller population. Their GDP is smaller at $60 billion, but once you equate for GDP per capita, it equates to $110,000 per person per year. So now what I'll do is use GDP per capita and explain this uneven wealth distribution. So 3 countries, being Nigeria, Pakistan, and Honduras, have a GDP per capita of roughly $4,000 per person per year. However, in Nigeria, 80% of that population live in poverty on less than $2 per day, whereas in Pakistan, the people that live on under $2 per day is 60%. In Honduras, people that live on under $2 per day is 30%. So there's obviously a massive wealth distribution inequality here. In countries like this, it is the classic cliche of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and that divide between the rich and the poor ever increases year after year. Now, I must state that there is a correlation between a country's GDP and the standards of living, but it doesn't tell the full story. We have technological, medical, and scientific advancements that have contributed to the growth of these economies and also the quality of living in these countries. Now, let's pause here and just touch on some of the factors that contribute to quality of life. We have the political and social environment, which includes political stability, crime rates, and law enforcement. We also have economic environment, which includes the currency exchange regulations and the banking services. We have socio-cultural environment, which includes media availability and censorship, limitations on personal freedom, etc. There's also the medical and health considerations, which include medical supplies and services, sewage, waste disposal, and air pollution. Schools and education obviously come into the equation. What are the standards and the availability of good quality education to the masses? Public services and transportation, including electricity, water, public transportation, and traffic congestion. We're also looking at recreation, which include restaurants, theaters, cinemas, sports, and other leisure activities, along with consumer goods, which is essentially the availability of good quality food and daily consumption items, and all of the other consumer goods that we spend our money on to make life a little bit easier and provide the creature comforts to live a comfortable life at home. Other components to consider for quality of life is the availability of housing. How much rental housing is there? What's the availability of general household appliances, furniture, maintenance services, etc. And the final one is, what's the natural environment like? What's the climate like? What's the record of natural disasters? Is there clean drinking water available to the masses? And what's the level of perceived safety in that country or city that you're living in? So GDP is obviously important if that country is spending its money in the right direction. Now, what makes up the GDP? This is consumption, investments, government spending, and net exports. I'm not going to talk about the last 3 too much, but what I will talk about is consumption, consumerism. We live in this consumer-driven world where we are essentially being marketed to 24/7 to keep up with the Joneses. Now, it probably seems like I've gone off on a massive tangent there, but please bear with me because there is a point to all of this, and I'm going to tie it all in together. Consumerism is fucking up the world. Okay, in the last 70 odd years, since 1950, the world's population has exploded. And along with that, so has consumption. Now, we are consuming more in the last 70 years than humans did in our entire history on planet Earth. Now, what does this mean for the world? This means that everything that we're buying needs to come from the earth. And there's a process that every single consumer good that we buy goes through to get to that point. We don't really pay attention to how things come to being in our cupboard or in our house or whatever. Okay, so there's a massive process here that affects everyone and it affects everything. We have the extraction of these raw materials that come from the earth. So you're setting up these big mining sites and things like that to extract these raw materials. And then it goes through the production of these raw materials, which includes the infrastructure for massive factories which are contributing to climate change. And then you've got the distribution. How do we distribute all of these consumer goods around the world, which obviously impact greenhouse gas emissions? Then we obviously have the consumption, where we go and buy these goods from retail outlets, off the internet, whatever. The other thing that people don't consider is the disposal of these consumer goods. For the most part, we don't pay attention to how we dispose of these goods. We just go to the shopping center or go on the internet, buy what we want. It gets delivered. Once we're done with it, we just fucking throw it out and don't have any awareness of what happens to this trash once we're done with it. Now, there is a massive vortex in the Pacific Ocean that spans twice the size of the United States, where basically all of this trash, all of this rubbish, all of these plastics have entered the water and the waterways of certain countries and ended up in the ocean. And the currents have taken all of this trash out into the Pacific Ocean, and there's these massive trash vortexes that are floating just under the surface that are wreaking havoc on marine life and the biology in the Pacific Ocean. Now, we don't really see the effects of this because it's between Japan, the east coast of Japan, and the west coast of the United States, and it's about 500 nautical miles off the coast of those countries. But it's been estimated that the rubbish vortexes could double in size over the next decade if consumers do not cut back on their use of plastics. It's also been estimated that more than 1 million seabirds and 100,000 marine mammals die every year as a result of plastic rubbish. So, that's going to affect the circle of life. If a lot of these marine animals are dying, that's going to mean that it's going to cut into our ability to fish and provide these food sources for the exponentially expanding world's population, which is obviously going to have an effect on our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. Now, I'm just going to pause there and touch on the agricultural impact that is affecting the planet, because I've done a post on social media when the Game Changers documentary came out that was basically demonizing proteins, and I rebutted a lot of the information that came out about animal sources being bad for the planet. Yes, of course. Industrial farming is bad for emitting greenhouse gases, and all of those processes I talked about before about the extraction, production, distribution, consumption, disposal, etc. have an impact on the environment. Now, I basically had a number of vegans message me via DM and have a little bit of a go at me for saying that meat is an essential part of a human's diet and nutrition. And their whole argument was that the meat industry is fucking up the planet. And I was like, all right, well, there's so many things that you're not considering. One thing to consider here is that we need to fucking eat. As humans, we need nourishment. We need food. But do you need all of those shoes? Do you need a new fucking iPhone every year? Do you need to upgrade your car every 2 years? Do you need all of those clothes in your cupboard? And this is the point of consumerism. It is all about wanting more. Okay, and that's the difference. Needs versus wants. We need to eat. So yes, we need to cater to the fact that the world's population is exploding and we need to feed all of these people. We need to provide water for all of these people, but we don't need all of these consumer goods. We want these goods because it's a status symbol and it allows us to flaunt our wealth. It allows us to express our status and who we are and who we've become in our life and everything that we've worked towards. It's an expression of our personality and who we are. That's the difference. It's wants versus needs. Now, I'm going to dive into this in a little bit more detail in a moment. We'll touch on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But before I do that, I want to touch on the impact that greenhouse gases are having on the planet. Prior to that, however, I just want to say that I'm not a hippie or I'm not a climate change warrior or anything like that. I'm simply a deep thinker and a practical and logical thinker. So that is the reason why I'm bringing this up in this podcast, because I'm concerned about the direction that the earth is moving and our ability to be able to sustain ourselves for, again, the future generations. And not even the future generations. I'm 35 years old. I would not be surprised in the next 50 years or so we see massive amounts of damage done to the earth that is irreversible. So we need to get on top of this stuff now. And the whole point of this podcast is for, to give some information so that people can go, all right, well, we're probably doing some fucking damage to the earth that we can't repair. And we need to do what we can now so that in 50 years' time, we're not fucking up our own lives. So what are greenhouse gases? They are simply gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. Now, there's a number of gases that are included in greenhouse gas emissions, and that is carbon dioxide, which makes up 81%. Then we have methane, which makes up roughly 10%, nitrous oxide, which makes up roughly 7%, and fluorinated gases, which make up roughly 3%. Now, we're going to spend some time on the carbon dioxide because that's contributing 81% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And carbon dioxide enters the atmosphere through burning fossil fuels like coal, natural gas, and oil, as well as solid waste, trees, and other biological materials. It's also a result of certain chemical reactions. Carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere or sequestered when it is absorbed by plants as part of the biological carbon cycle. Now, greenhouse gases trap heat and make the planet warmer, and human activities are responsible for almost all of the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere over the last 150 years. The largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from human activities in the United States is from burning fossil fuels for electricity, heat, and transportation. And the article I have up in front of me has electricity at 27%, transportation at 28%, industry at 22%, commercial and residential at 12%, and agriculture at 10% of those contributing factors. Now, this is the US. China is actually the biggest contributor to these greenhouse gases, which is impacting climate change. Now, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes reading off an excerpt from a book that I've just finished reading, which was really thought-provoking for me. And the book is by Stephen Hawking, who is one of the great thinkers of the modern era. And the book is called Brief Answers to the Big Questions. And Stephen Hawking states, "The Earth is under threat from so many areas that it is difficult for me to be positive. The threats are too big and too numerous. First, the Earth is becoming too small for us. Our physical resources are being drained at an alarming rate. We have presented our planet with the disastrous gift of climate change, rising temperatures, reduction of the polar ice caps, deforestation, overpopulation, disease, war, famine, lack of water, and decimation of animal species. These are all solvable, but so far have not been solved. Global warming is caused by all of us. We want cars, travel, and a better standard of living. The trouble is, by the time people realize what is happening, it may be too late. As we stand on the brink of a second nuclear age and a period of unprecedented climate change, scientists have a special responsibility, once again, to inform the public and to advise leaders about the perils that humanity faces. As scientists, we understand the dangers of nuclear weapons and the devastating effects, and we are learning how human activities and technologies are affecting climate systems in ways that may forever change life on Earth. As citizens of the world, we have a duty to share that knowledge and to alert the public to the unnecessary risks that we live with every day. We foresee great peril if governments and societies do not take action now to render nuclear weapons obsolete and to prevent further climate change. At the same time, many of those same politicians are denying the reality of man-made climate change, or at least the ability of man to reverse it, just at the moment that our world is facing a series of critical environmental crises. The danger is that global warming may become self-sustaining, if it has not become so already. The melting of the Arctic and Antarctic ice caps reduces the fraction of solar energy reflected back into space, and so increases the temperature further. Climate change may kill off the Amazon and other rainforests, and so eliminate one of the main ways in which carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. The rise in sea temperature may trigger the release of large quantities of carbon dioxide. Both these phenomena would increase the greenhouse effect and so exacerbate global warming. Both effects could make our climate like that of Venus, boiling hot and raining sulfuric acid, but with a temperature of 250 degrees Celsius. Human life would be unsustainable. He goes on to say, I think we are acting with reckless indifference to our future on planet Earth. At the moment, we have nowhere else to go, but in the long run, the human race shouldn't have all its eggs in one basket, or on one planet. I just hope that we can avoid dropping the basket before we learn how to escape from Earth. He goes on to say that we should explore space and basically try and colonize space. To round out that excerpt, he states, at no time in the 10,000 years or so since the last ice age has the human race been in a state of constant knowledge and fixed technology. There have been a few setbacks, like what we used to call the Dark Ages after the fall of the Roman Empire, but the world's population, which is a measure of our technological ability to preserve life and feed ourselves, has risen steadily, with a few hiccups like the Black Death. In the last 200 years, the growth has at times been exponential, and the world population has jumped from 1 billion to about 7.6 billion. And finally, there is no sign that scientific and technological development will dramatically slow down and stop in the near future. But the present rate of growth cannot continue for the next millennium. By the year 2600, the world's population would be standing shoulder to shoulder, and the electricity consumption would make the earth glow red hot. So what I'm going to do now is go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs briefly, because this will explain in a little bit more detail how we can progress through the hierarchy of needs, what they mean, and how we can impact that for us moving towards being the best person that we can be. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a motivational theory in psychology comprising a 5-tier model of human needs, often depicted as hierarchical levels within a pyramid. Understanding what needs are currently being fulfilled and what's lacking may help you make decisions on where to invest your time and energy. Needs lower down in the hierarchy must be satisfied before individuals can attend to needs higher up. The wider the base, the higher the peak. So at the base of the pyramid, we have physiological needs, which are biological requirements for human survival, and this includes air, food, water, shelter, clothing, warmth, sex, and sleep. If these needs are not satisfied, the human body cannot function optimally. Maslow considered physiological needs the most important, as all the other needs become secondary until these needs are met. Once those needs are met, then the second tier of the pyramid is your safety needs, which is protection from the elements, security, order, law, stability, and freedom from fear. The third tier is love and belongingness needs. So after physiological and safety needs have been fulfilled, the third level of human needs is social and involves feelings of belongingness. The need for interpersonal relationships motivates behavior. Examples include friendship, intimacy, trust and acceptance, receiving and giving affection and love, affiliating and being part of a group, including friends, family and work. Then we have the esteem needs, which Maslow classified into two categories. The first category being esteem for oneself, which includes dignity, achievement, mastery, independence, and the second being the desire for reputation or respect from others, example, status and prestige. Maslow indicated that the need for respect or reputation is most important for children and adolescents and precedes real self-esteem or dignity. Now, this is where the consumption and consumerism comes into play, because everything that we own, everything that we buy, as I said earlier, represents our personality and who we are and what we've made of ourselves. Now, at the peak of the pyramid, we have self-actualization needs, which is realizing personal potential, self-fulfillment, seeking personal growth and peak experience. It's essentially a desire to become everything one is capable of becoming. So once we understand the hierarchy of needs and we get a gauge of where we're at, then it makes it so much easier to start living a life of value and living a life of purpose. So I've obviously spent quite a lot of time diving into science and psychology, but what I'm going to do now is kind of go through my life and tell my story of my own path to minimalism, which hopefully people can take some lessons from and start implementing some of the lessons that I've learned into their own life. Now, I grew up in a poor family. I didn't have any money when I was growing up. My parents didn't work. I never really had too much as a child. In fact, for 6 years of my life, I didn't have any running water or electricity or anything like that. And we ended up building our own house on a block of land that had nothing on it. So we literally had the bare essentials to survive, and we never had any money to buy nice things or anything like that. And a lot of the times we would go to the rubbish dump and we would forage through the tip and find things that could benefit us, and we would take those things back home and start playing with old used bikes and things like that. And I'm the eldest of 6 kids, so yes, we did have our own personal belongings as children, but we also saw the need to share those resources that we had. And we obviously need to share all of our food, and we need to make sure that all of the other children were eating as well. And as a family, we had to fight for everything that we had. Now, I look back on those times and I'm really grateful for the experiences that it gave me. I didn't like it at the time. I actually hated it, and I was embarrassed of my family situation and our socioeconomic status. And there was actually a period of time where, we would meet new people, or we'd have other friends come around that would see how we lived and the house that we lived in and the environment that we lived in. And, word started spreading, and I would get teased at school. I would get bullied as being a blocky because we didn't have running water or electricity, and we didn't even have concrete floors, and it was just carpet laid down on the ground. And when it rained, the fucking roof would leak. And for a period of time, my brother and I lived in literally a garden shed. When the family would bathe, we had a bathtub in the bathroom, and then we had a spare bathtub that was outside that had been kind of dug into a hole that was chalked up on some blocks, and all of our water came from rainwater tanks. And when those rainwater tanks were running low, we'd have to get the local volunteer fire department to bring their water trucks around to pump water out of a dam to bring that around to our place to put in the rainwater tanks. And we would take this water and put it in the spare bathtub and light a fire underneath it so we could heat up water. And then my mum would grab a bucket and take that hot water and pour it into the main bathtub. And we had 8 people in our family, and every single person bathed in that same bath water. And because we lived in the bush, there was droughts that was affecting the region, that was affecting the state. And when water was not available, there would be times where we would go like a couple of days without bathing because we didn't have the water, we didn't have the resources to be able to tap into so that we could bathe. And I look back at that, and again, I was embarrassed by that situation, but I really appreciate it now because it makes me appreciate the little things that we have in our life, and that is the whole point of minimalism. Now, I left home when I was 14, had an abusive stepdad, and, was going down the wrong path. I was being influenced by people that were older than me, people that I was hanging out with, my friends, that, I started diving into drugs and alcohol and shit like that. And I very soon realized that that was not the path that I wanted to go down. Also, my stepdad was abusive towards me and particularly my mum, as well as some of the other kids, but my mum definitely copped the most of it, probably followed by me. And I left home when I was 14 and I moved to Darwin, started working up there, got into the workforce. Now, once I started making money, I was like, cool, now I can buy all the fucking things that I need, all of those things that I never had growing up. And again, it became a status symbol. And, I was a 14, 15-year-old kid making $15 an hour. This was back in 2000, so that was really good money at the time. And I was clearing like $1,000 a week, and I was rolling in money. And for me, that was completely different to the lifestyle that I had. And I could have whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, within reason. I mean, what does a 15-year-old kid want? Wants material possessions. So that's what I did. I spent a lot of my money on all of these material possessions. Then I went to Sydney for a couple of years. I didn't really have much then. I sold everything and went down to Sydney, started again, basically from scratch. And then a couple of years later, I moved back to Darwin and joined the army, and I stored all of my material possessions that I'd built up over the last couple of years in Sydney. And, I chalked out my house with everything that I wanted, an awesome surround sound, stereo system, big flat screen TV, PlayStation, all the games, heaps of CDs and DVDs and all that type of stuff. I literally had everything that I wanted. Then when I joined the army, I left all that stuff at one of my mate's parents' places in their shed, went to the military, went through my training processes and all that type of stuff. Now, once I marched out, finished my basic recruit training and then my initial employment training, I was off to Iraq, and I vividly recall being down at the offices where our platoon was hanging out in preparation to go to Iraq, and our platoon sergeant came out with a heap of documents, and he started handing them out, and then he goes, boys, this is your inventory. I need you to write down everything that you own with a dollar value put to it, and this is going to be stored at the expense of the Commonwealth. The army is going to pay to have this stuff stored whilst we deploy to Iraq. Now, we all filled out our paperwork, and a couple of days later we came back in, and the platoon sergeant came storming out of the office, and he gathers us all around and he goes, why the fuck do you guys have so much stuff? You don't need all this shit. This is all material possessions, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, everything I own fits into 2 trunks. And I remember looking at the other boys and going, this dude's fucking nuts. Like, what is he on about? But again, I look back at what he said there and I'm like, man, this dude had some knowledge back then. I didn't appreciate what he was saying back then. I didn't understand what he was saying back then. I was like, how can he live like that? But now I look back and I can appreciate that. So over the next few years, I deployed to Iraq, East Timor, Afghanistan, and again, I was making good money whilst I was overseas. We weren't paying rent, we weren't paying for food and all this type of stuff. So everything that I was making, I couldn't spend my money on anything whilst I was deployed. So everything I was making was just sitting in my bank account. Now, when we got back from these deployments, a lot of boys would go out and buy new cars and fit out their house with all this furniture and all this cool shit that they wanted, all these boys' toys, motorbikes and cars and boats and jet skis and pretty much everything that they wanted. Whereas because I'd come from that background of not really having much, I kind of already had the things that I wanted. I didn't need to spend my money on all of these flash new things because I'd never had money before. So I decided that I was going to kind of keep my money in a safe space so that if I did find myself in a situation where, I didn't have any income or anything like that, I had a buffer, I had something to fall back on. And this went on for a couple of years. Once I got out of the army in 2012, I met a girl and decided that I was going to move down to Tasmania and pursue her and pursue this relationship. And I recall this vividly as well was once I decided that I was going to move down to Tasmania and pursue this relationship, I decided to sell everything, and everything that I couldn't sell, I got packed up and sent down to my mum's house. And it was liberating to have people come into my house and, take these possessions that I'd earned over the years that had become a status symbol for how successful I'd become and the person that I'd come and all the hard work that I'd put into being able to buy the things that I wanted whenever I wanted. And I put everything on Gumtree, and people started coming into the house and giving me money, and I had a fuckload of cash in my hand, and my house was empty. And I was like, wow, this feels amazing. Everything that I didn't sell, or all of my most prized possessions, I packed up and sent it to my mum's place. And I literally jumped on a flight to Tasmania with just a backpack and the things that I needed to at least get me through the next 6 months of my life. And that was absolutely liberating. And for me, I haven't looked back, and I haven't acquired a heap of material possessions because I realized that those material possessions did not bring me happiness. They didn't bring me fulfillment. And I came to this conclusion because my ex-girlfriend and I would work for 8 or 9 months every year, and then we'd close down our businesses and go and travel around the world for 3 to 4 months. And every single time we lived out of a backpack, and we had to carry everything that we needed for those 3 to 4 months. And every time that we got home back to Tasmania, we didn't really pay too much attention to all of the things that we had packed up. We led a very simple life. We didn't really buy anything that was excessive or outside of our needs. Of course, we bought a few niceties here and there, like a nice bed and things like that to sleep in to allow us to get a better night's sleep and all that type of stuff, but it was never excessive. We never bought a new car. We always bought secondhand, like cheap runabout cars because, again, we knew that we were only going to be there for 8 to 9 months before we left again. And I recall buying like an $800 car and driving that around for like 2 years. And then I ended up gifting it to a friend for his birthday so he could go out and, thrash it around the bush with his mates. And then a couple of years ago in 2017, I basically had to restart again because Laura and I ended up breaking up. We went our separate ways, and I packed up everything that I owned and sold whatever else I couldn't. And everything that I owned fit into my little Subaru sedan, and I drove up to my mum's place and pretty much dumped everything that I owned in a cupboard in her spare room, and again packed a backpack to come to Thailand, move to Thailand on a one-way flight, not knowing what I was going to do with my life, where I was going to be, where I was going to end up, how long I was going to be gone for. So again, I had a backpack, and I had enough to sustain me for at least the next 6 months. And once I got to Thailand, then, I got offered a full-time job. I ended up becoming the head strength and conditioning coach at Tiger Muay Thai. And I still live a life of minimalism. I mean, I've bought a few things, a few niceties here and there to allow me to enjoy the finer things in life. But again, I don't have excessive material wealth. I've got a motorbike that I use for long road trips. I've got a scooter, which I use to get to and from work. I've got a drone, which I fucking love because it allows me to, take snapshots of my memories and places that I've visited and, give me a different perspective of places that I never would have otherwise seen. And I've got a GoPro that I take scuba diving with me, and a PlayStation 4 that I bought at the start of lockdown, knowing full well that I was going to be confined to the house. And I'm one of those people that if I'm at home and I've got work to do, I've got projects to work on, then I'm going to be spending a lot of time doing that stuff. So I needed a PlayStation I didn't need a PlayStation. I wanted a PlayStation to kind of force me to switch off. Now, here's the whole point of this story that I've told. It is not about not owning things. It is about owning things that bring you purpose. The drone and the GoPro I love photographs, okay? Anyone who knows me knows that I love fucking taking good photographs. And in my house, I've got like 12 to 15 photos that I've taken from my travels around the world, blown up. and put around my house. And these cost me like $600 to $700 to get them blown up. Okay. And that to me is more important than some of these other possessions like, clothes and shoes and all of this other shit that people don't even wear anyway. So for me, having those memories, spending money on memories rather than material possessions is important. Now, this is not to say that this is for everyone. All I'm saying is live with intent, spend with purpose, and only buy the things that you need to live a good life. Don't be one of those people that has 26 pairs of shoes and, 20 of those pairs you've never worn before. Don't be one of those people that has a fuckload of clothes in the cupboard that you never wear. Don't be one of those people who buys a new iPhone every time or every year a new phone comes out, and you're constantly updating, you're constantly upgrading, and you're constantly in search of the new flash shiny thing, because you need to consider what that impact is having on the environment. But not only what that impact is having on the environment, but what is that impacting, or how is that impacting you? Let me ask you guys this question. Are you a consumer or are you consumed? And this goes not just for material possessions, but also for technology, social media. Social media is a brilliant invention, but it's also ruining people's lives as well. Okay, we are so socially connected, yet so socially disconnected at the same time. So minimalism for me is simply living a life of intent and purpose, and primarily focusing on the things that I need to live, to get by, but also having a few wants that allow me to live a better life without being excessive. And what this practically means is that I don't go out of my way to buy things. As things come up in my life, then I ask myself, do I need this? If I don't need it, then I can put it off. But then I ask myself, do I want this? If I do want that, how much do I want it? What am I willing to give up? What am I willing to get rid of? I have a rule that if I buy something, I need to get rid of something so that I don't acquire all of this rubbish and start cluttering up my house. And something else that I do that promotes minimalism for me in regards to technology is I limit my social media time every single day. Every day I have my timer on my watch set to 90 minutes, and every time I go on social media, I start that timer, and it's a countdown timer for 90 minutes. And once I get to 90 minutes for the day, then that's my social media time done. I switch off. That means that every time I go on social media, I know that that clock is ticking and I'm not fucking wasting time scrolling, and I'm going on social media to do what I need to do. And for the most part, that's going to be social media posts, creating content. That's going to be replying to emails and messages and things like that. And it's things that are promoting my business and my health and wellness. It's not taking away from that stuff. Now, I'm going to start winding up the episode with a couple of points. The first point being that every single time that I've been traveling, and I have been to some very poor countries around the world, every single time I've been humbled by those experiences. And I've always noticed that some of the people that have the least are also the most happiest, as long as those basic life requirements are met in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those physiological needs of having food, water, shelter are met, then typically people that have the least are the happiest. And the next thing that I want to finish with is one of the best books that I've read that talks about all of these different philosophies is called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. And if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend getting onto that because it is a brilliant read. That's it from me today, guys. Tune in next week to hear me round out the Swiss 8 mini-series with my man, Tristan Rose from Blind Tiger Yoga. And this Thursday, I'll be back for my Reflections episode. Peace. The Western world is in the middle of a mental health crisis, and our veterans have taken action. Swiss 8's team of combat veterans have built a proactive mental health program that is delivered through a mobile app. The app offers users programs in 8 categories of health and lifestyle, all proven to reduce anxiety and depression. This holistic model forms your daily routine, aiding you to build structure, improve discipline, and take ownership of your life. Once these habits are formed, the app will teach you new skills that can form identity, purpose, and encourage physical interaction to rebuild your tribe and reduce isolation.